Why, hello, and welcome to Generation Dan. I just slammed a notebook. Welcome to Generation Dan, the podcast about generational differences from two people from two different generations. I'm Atlas Novak. I'm your millennial. Who else is here?
I'm Dino the Genetic Marvel, and I can confirm that both of us can read. So
Yeah,
that's the start of it. Let's call it there.
Oh yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, we typed our names by accident. We just went meh, and then
That with just our bare hands. Yeah, it's that's how it works nowadays.
yeah.
Yeah. No, it's it's funny that I don't know. Like you also went to school for English, right? So and creative writing, right? So it's like
Yeah.
understanding the importance of books, I'm assuming, was very, very young in your life. Yes?
Yeah, I think because where my dad was in medicine and my mom was also a nurse.
Yeah.
It's like Skinny
Yeah.
Skinny John Goodman.
It's fair. Guy. And you know what the worst part is?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I'm still not thin, like I'm still
Yeah.
fat. And people are like, you look great. I'm like, I'm still very fat. And they're like, no. I'm like, yeah. Definitely.
Okay. Joey, so this is from the card game I play. It's
Yes.
like it's a nerd shirt from that. All of the game is split into nations. So this is one of the nations, Stoicheia. For possessive, it's ATLAS apostrophe. There's nothing after it.
Yeah.
So Atlas's is just apostrophe at the end. Anyway, we're like 3 layers deep on off topic. So my mom was an English major, and
It's accurate.
my dad was an engineering major. So where my sister was better at the math stuff and I was better at the English stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I discovered the importance of books pretty early, except I didn't really like to read when I was a kid.
Yep.
That didn't really start to happen until like high school.
Really? May I ask what genre was what brought you into it? What's happening, McT? Joey, thank you for showing up, brother. Appreciate it.
Definitely the Harry Potter series.
Oh yeah, because that's when you were a child. Oh,
yeah, so my dad read me the first 3 books when I was a wee lad, and then the 4th book came out when I was starting to be like, oh, I'm like 13, 14, and that's Harry's age. Yeah. Animal Farm affected my outlook on life. I bet it did. It's
definitely.
Yeah. Well, fuck you up, Animal Farm.
See, I was in high school in the 90s, and this is the thing is like we grew up. I have never seen or read any Harry Potter.
Neither
you seem
Katie.
The kind that would hate it.
Yeah,
Katie hasn't. Wow.
Katie and I watched the movies together, which was interesting. So she hadn't seen any of the movies, and just her family just didn't do Harry Potter. So she was like, no, just
lame.
Oh yeah, no. The Of Mice and Men made me cry when we read.
Never read that. I heard about it and I was like, oh, that sounds horrible.
No, the end of that book will fuck you up for sure.
See, this is the thing: is growing up, being very religious. What we read the Bible on a weekly basis, like as a family, before Saturday breakfast. Yeah, and so there was a weekly reading of the Bible.
You guys do popcorn?
No. Trust me, it was. And the thing is,
popcorn. Ezekiel 25:17 or whatever the thing was from Pulp Fiction. Yeah.
The point is that between comic books and the Bible, I'm like, at a very young age, I'm like, I had a solid vocabulary and just a lot more capability and comfort with reading out loud because we would read it. So we would sit around the table after breakfast and we would read, and my dad would be okay, next, and we would go around the table and go through it piece by piece.
Yeah, that's popcorn reading.
All right.
Okay, sorry. That's
just what we're I don't know.
Yeah.
But the thing was, like, if you I would get lost so many times, and I'm like, I'm just trying to find where we are because I didn't pay attention and stuff. And then he'd be like, Dino, and I'm like, where are we? He's like, nah. You'd always get caught, and he would get so mad. And we would like reading the Bible is very seldom an exciting read, right? It's more just mass information and understanding and comprehension, and you have to think about it too, right?
Mhm.
It's like Animal Farm and that kind of stuff. It makes sense. So it's always something like where you have a hard time. That's why I like comic books. I was like, oh yeah, what's the big deal? Awesome, loved it. I'm being real too. Like, the Bible affected me too. Like I don't know how to read now because that was the thing. Like so in school, a librarian was like, I go, well, I like fantasy stuff, and I read Sherlock Holmes, and I enjoyed that because there was knowledge to it.
Mhm.
Like read The Hobbit. I got a page and a half into The Hobbit, and this guy doesn't speak English. Not interested, you know.
I don't care that he was at the Battle of the Somme. Make it more interesting.
Well, that was the thing, and like now, Victoria has read the Silmarillion too. My best friend, he has all of them. He's like, you should read them. I'm like, absolutely not, and it turned me off from reading for the longest time. And I just like I didn't. I had a hard time reading for recreation. And then in my 20s, I started reading kind of like one book for growth, one book for enjoyment. And the hard part was I had a close friend who I'm no longer friends with because he's a cunt. He would like feed me cool fantasy novels, like full stories and stuff that were really enjoyable. So it's like he was an avid reader because he was like a traditional white guy. Like he was a honky, like full honky. Okay. And his wife's parents are from Pennsylvania, which I'm like, that's also double honky, right?
That's pretty white.
I
sure.
like books about the Bible more than
the Bible itself.
That's the problem. Is the Bible is an educational tool, whereas the stories in the Bible are so much fun. I know that sounded weird. They're really cool stories, right?
As Patton Oswalt said, it's got monsters and adventures, and
it's got magic and sorcery. Like that's the thing is like, so if you read like the story of David, from the height to the depth, and then they're like guys in a pit of lions, and the lions are like, nah, he's cool, and you're like, bro, that will break your brain as a child, right?
Yeah,
because then you're like, I'm gonna fuck up a lion. No, that's not how it works, idiot.
Did your parents let you read the Divine Comedy, or was that too?
Oh no, definitely not. That's not number one. That's apocrypha, right? It's not. That's not. It's remember there's a difference between literature and things that are adjacent, biblically adjacent, because you got to remember too is like there's no such thing as hell in the Bible, and like when your religious background is Bible based, they're like, well, is that in the Bible? And they're like, no. They're like, then why do you fear hell if it's not in the Bible? Well, some guy, you're like, that's not how life works. Like there's that side of things. And even like, as I said before, like being religious, even my dad was like, hey, stay away from those people. Those guys are weirdos, right? Like
there's like the fire and brimstone types, or
and that's the thing is you're like, that's a lack of knowledge. And that's why like it was such a transition for me to go from reading for knowledge and growth to enjoyment. Because I have a close friend, probably my oldest friend. I've known her since grade 2. She'll plow through like a real, like an adult, like person novel, like a real, like 300-400 page novel in an afternoon. And I'm like, how do you? Yeah. She's very small too. So I'm like, you don't do things fast. You're very little. What are you, sneaky like a ghost? Like it's very.
that was part of like, I'm sure it was when you were a kid too, where they were like, all right, read the rest of this novel in the afternoon. Yes, definitely. YouTube has destroyed my attention span. Where like you tell a high schooler, all right, finish the last half of Mice and Men, of To Kill a Mockingbird, whatever the thing is. Yeah. And then they're able to just do it, and then they have a test the next day. I don't know how possible that is for the TikTok generation in high school now.
I remember having such a hard time staying focused to read for long periods of time. Like I could do it with the Bible because my dad will whoop my ass if I didn't, right? Like it was still boring. But I get a beating. Whereas like a book, he's like, who cares? It's just a book. Like I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird for the first time, and man, that's a great book. But it's also so enlightening that you're like, listen, that was a hard time in American history for segregation and people and people with disabilities and people who look different and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, see, as much hate as there is, you can be a better person. You don't have to be who people assume you are, you know, and that's a huge level of growth as a human being, right? Like it's a because especially as a child, right? You stand there going, well, I don't have a choice. And as with regards to Joey's point, bro, Mountains of Madness, a guy did the entire, it's like 6 hours long. It's a Russian guy, but there's some artwork, and it's like still, but it's like 3D, so like there's a perspective and stuff. He did an incredible job, and the guy who's voicing it is spectacular. And I'm like, bro, if they did more of that, like I have friends who listen to audiobooks, but I'm like, I feel like audiobooks is cheating. At least you're still using your eyeballs when you're watching it as a readout. I don't know. It's weird.
I can understand audiobooks like driving at work, stuff like that. I'll give
oh sure. You know? Yeah.
But if it's the type of thing where like I'm sitting in a chair, I got these big, you know, Rush headphones on, and I'm listening to, you know, that. Come on, just read the book, you know.
After a certain age, you've heard every possible story, and books are boring because. So, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's easier to recognize tropes as you get older, and you start seeing the same stuff more and more. But I don't think it's impossible for you to enjoy stories ever again.
Like, see, and you're absolutely right, and that's why it's like the something that's really ruined things for myself is being knowledgeable of plot devices and how people try and lay things out. Like, who was it? The guys who do South Park.
Trey and Matt.
Yeah. They were saying how a lot of the times the story is this happened, then this happened, then this happened. You're like, that's not a story. That's just things that happen. Whereas this happened, so this happened because of it, and then because of that, so it's therefore, and you're like, that is kind of how, like, that's more of something like Superbad. How you're like, is a series of events that kept on combining and adding to the hilarity, whereas like a lot of romantic comedies, you're like, I need love, but I want to love, but I'm afraid of love, but I need love, and you're like, how about this? Why don't you go fuck the wall? You know, like that. You know?
I think it also, like, if you grow up watching movies like that, it makes it harder to just like be a person, because then you kind of expect life to work like that. And that's a thing for a different episode, but just.
We can definitely do an episode on movies, but that's one of the things I found too with reading was that when you read like from the same author, you'll pick up on certain tendencies that they have as well. So the hard part as the author is to keep on bringing in new characters, and then you evolve your original character so that they can make progress, right? I remember reading one about this guy who he becomes kind of like he hooks up with a vampire, but he's technically like a super powered. It's a really cool story. I'll share it with you sometime. But his thing was how he was like, haha, they forgot to look up. And then the last like big fight, he's like, I forgot to look up. Oh my God. And you're like, hey, always look up. And you're like, you know what? Like it's a weird thing where you're going, hey, look where everyone else isn't looking is where you should look. And that's why, like, when I watched The Boys, which, by the way, highly recommend. It's a great show. Remind me to show you something about The Boys later. They one of the things was like the whole audience of people look away from Homelander to something, but Carl Urban is turned around looking right at him and is like, fuck you, bro, right to his face. And you're like, that's the difference in existence of fighting the trend versus, you know, going with it. And like, absolutely, Joey, like, you've heard of every story, but ultimately you're still in a situation where being able to appreciate new and weird things can definitely make it. I feel like that's part of youth too, right? Like allowing yourself to enjoy the retelling of a story or something to that nature. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's definitely a tough one.
Like, I'll give you an example. So,
Please.
looking through all of the Harry Potter books, you have like new characters coming in every time. Like the second book introduces Dobby and the House Elves. Third one introduces his
Rest in peace,
godfather,
Dobby.
Sirius Black. Yeah, R.I.P. A free elf. But like they introduce a few new characters every time.
Yeah.
But the story mostly changes the same, which is Harry tries to have a normal year at Hogwarts.
Every time.
Something fucks it up.
Every time.
Yeah. Therefore, happens. So like the first time he's miserable life. He goes to Hogwarts for the first time, and he's just trying to like figure all this shit out.
Definitely.
But then he finds the Mirror of Erised and
sees his parents,
and then he starts researching about that, and then that kind of gets put to the side for a while, where he finds out about the whole Philosopher's Stone thing, and Ron and Hermione are like, okay, well, we have to go protect it because Snape is trying to steal it, and then it just builds on itself. So after that, you come back on the second year and you're thinking, are they just going to do the same thing again?
Yeah.
Where like Voldemort's on the back of someone's head? No, it's something else.
So I did appreciate that, where they didn't use the same shtick over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an easy trap that most creators of entertainment and
a lot of movie
media
writers,
so many like
who's
the guy? Oh, we like watching his stuff. He does kind of like mystery type limited series. Like it'll be like a short, like one season, 6 episodes, and it'll be like how this person got murdered, but it's like a whole series of events. It's complex, and you're like, who did it and stuff. But you're like, he always tries to involve new characters, new perspectives, new things, and you're like, that's not an easy thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's how many times have people been told, yeah, just do it like the last one. Why? Last one made money.
And it will.
Worked, yeah. Well, we're in an environment, I think, culturally and globally, that so many people just duplicate what somebody else is doing and then produce it and say, well, this is my version. And you're like, no, that's not creative. You know,
the first thing that popped into my head when you're trying to like, it's at the tip of my tongue. Knives Out, Rian Johnson, or am I thinking of something else?
No, someone else. It's more. It's he does a lot of Netflix stuff. I forget what his name is. I'll be honest with you, but I'll find out. Okay. My wife will remember.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But that guy too, the Knives Out guy. Yeah. He's built 2 of those Knives Out stories, and they've been very enjoyable. I honestly want to punch Daniel Craig in the face for that accent, but it is hilarious. It is completely ridiculous on purpose.
It is one of those things where I'm like, I fucking hate that accent, but it's the funniest shit in the world.
Absolutely. And you know what? The fact that they acknowledge that it's ridiculous and it's done completely for the off-putting humor of it, I'm like, you know what? As long as we're just being honest, I'm okay with it because it is funny and definitely ridiculous.
It's that same kind of Borat thing where it's meant to be off-putting a little bit.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, very nice.
I still, every time
like Foghorn Leghorn.
Well, that's absolutely. And like, look, hereristically, every time I hear somebody go, very nice, I hear, very nice. Yeah. And I'm like.
Or whenever you hear, when you say my wife.
Yeah. Okay. So what about books that made you act a certain way? Like no one in Gen X didn't act like a greaser for. Oh yeah, I read Outsiders. Outsiders was a great book though, and a great movie. And it was like.
Books that made you act a certain way. I think when like Twilight came out when I was in like middle school, like that started to pick up steam in the mid to late 2000s. The Twilight books, you had a lot of the girls doing the Team Jacob, Team Edward thing, and then the boys were just kind of like
hunting. They go out into the wilderness. Like, can something bite me?
Like
I'm just trying to get laid.
Yeah, exactly. The boys are like, God damn it!
Like, all right, I'm a vampire now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I just want to get laid. God damn it! Yeah,
like that's
exactly.
that's. And you know what? So, here's a question for you, Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read something because a girl was reading it?
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. May or may not have gotten through the first half of 50 Shades of Grey in the first part of college, and it's terrible. It's the worst book I've ever read.
I have heard so many women who, I'll be honest with you, they do seem like perverts, but also educated. They're like 3 pages. I got 3 pages in, and I'm like, this person must be an idiot because they can't write for shit.
Well, because it was originally Twilight fan fiction. Not gonna lie, this is the first time I have talked books on YouTube. Well, that'll happen. That'll happen on Generation Dan.
I feel like this is also like a weird version of Men on Film. Hated it.
Yeah.
On TV, it's great. No, that's.
I was thinking about this the other day, or earlier, when we were talking about you reading the Bible, and I brought up the Divine Comedy. So Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. I didn't know that was fan fiction, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because when I first read it, I first found out about it because, like, I went through a Greek mythology phase in middle school, like all white boys do. It's
called your life, my friend. Don't worry. The Greeks know. It's okay.
So I went through a phase of that, and then I just kind of wanted more stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I got into the Lightning Thief series of books. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Good books. And then after that, I was like, they're like, yeah, so there's a thing where a guy just goes through heaven, purgatory, and hell, and he sees a bunch of, mythological figures. And you're like, I'm reading that shit. Yeah.
Love it. Absolutely. And then you're going, oh, really?
So I read it, and there were parts where I was like, he's really getting into the Pope for like, he really hates the Pope. And then it turns out, it was just him being like, yeah, fuck you, I'm going to write a book about fuck you, the Pope. And just, I just love that. That's great.
Well, see, but I feel like that may be the key that we've lost, is that every type of media or creation, like, look, there are a lot of people who still like poetry and stuff too, which that you're a weirdo. I went to school with a guy who wrote poetry, and I'm like, gross, bro, gross. And he was like, I have so much romance inside of me. And I'm like, maybe you should get that checked, because that's weird.
I just have a particular hatred for poets, because when I was first starting out in comedy, it was before I could drink. So all the mics I went to were like coffee shops and like in the park and stuff. So I ran into a lot of poets. They always ran the goddamn light. They were already always dicks. Fuck poets.
And that's, you know what? Poetry is pales in comparison to how bad it is when you compare it to poets. Poets are much worse than poetry. Poetry, sometimes it does something for you, and you're like, hey, I have emotions. I want to feel something. But poets, absolutely the worst. Absolutely the worst. The book review in my community would be like, do anyone else read the book? Okay, no, let's smoke it up. But that's okay. But that's the other thing was,
Joey should just do a book club where, like, you just forgot to read the book every time, then just get high.
See, I feel who wouldn't? But you know what? That's the other thing is, like, there was a book club. I think every grade school has a book club. No, is that a thing where everybody has to read books? And if you get so many books, you get an award. And it was usually you get a free pan pizza if you buy a full pizza. Get fucked. You're like,
they have that's that, or like it usually ties in with the book fair. We'll get into the book fair later in this episode.
Listen, Scholastic, you sweet evil drug dealer. That's what you are. There's no. Man, and I would go in there with $20, and I was a king, if not a god, on that day. And then I come home with posters. My parents are like, "You're an idiot." I'm like, "Yeah."
When did you realize with the whole book club thing that they didn't really check if you read the book? You know what I mean? You could kind of just walk up and say, like, "I read it," like after a reasonable amount of time, and then they would believe you.
I was too stupid. I'll be honest with you. I remember. So this was the other thing, was that it was ingrained into me to never lie. Right.
Okay.
So I'm honest to a fault. And also, too, I never lie to protect myself because I feel like that's a failure in character as well.
Okay.
So they'd be like, I would always like, I could not, like, I only learned my game face until well into my 20s. So, like, people would say something stupid, and I'm like, what? Are you? Like, it's not, I was not kind to people in that fashion. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that, like, I would just be like, no, I didn't. I hated it. It was so boring. Like,
Yeah.
like I found it because I still have a pretty vibrant imagination. So, like, it's weird when people are like, read this book from so long ago where people just played with a circle and a stick. And I'm like, what? No, I'm going to go play video games. Why would I do that? You know? Or when I was young, I'd go outside, play in the yard, do things, you know? So yeah, I can only imagine how difficult it is. Actually, I do love the short stories on YouTube. So it's a short, so it's a minute long, and they just read out like a very short, scary story, or a 2-sentence scary story. Which I'm like, honestly, I love it because they're terrifying. And
are we talking
well,
like baby shoes never worn type of deal, where it's like get a huge amount of information across with like a very few words?
Sometimes, but like other times, it's like I heard my mom screaming from downstairs, so I wanted to check on her, but then I realized she was upstairs with me, and you're like, "Ooh, someone's in the house!" You know, like it's immediately. As a dad, I hate Book Fair Day now because it's all over Price PS. Well,
hate to break it to you, Joey. That's how it was from the get-go.
I'm just thankful that like there were not many trading card games that weren't viewed as the devils when I was a kid because I would have been right on those babies. Like,
because this was like what late 80s, early 90s, or
late 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, late 80s.
So you would have had just Magic,
which is the fucking devil. Period.
Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh don't come out till 96, and then
and I immediately was calling them gay. Let's just be like, it's gay, right?
Yeah.
That's
so all you really had was Magic. And,
yeah. Well, remember when I was young, there was a huge. See, that's the thing is like literature can direct you in so many different ways, right? And that's one of the key components I found that were very impactful to people was that the idea that you couldn't open that up to yourself. Like I have one book. It's actually a really good book, and it's supposed to be from the perspective of a demon.
Yeah.
And then it reveals that the demon was possessing the Gutenberg press because it gave knowledge. It gave knowledge to the masses, and that's what the devil wanted.
I love me some good unreliable narrator.
It's so it's not very long, but it's so well positioned that you're like, because it's the idea that like for the record, I hate Noam Chomsky and he's all the media is the message. He can go fuck himself. But the point is that knowing that the media that you use is a message in and of itself is a valuable point. And the fact is that that press changed the how knowledge was transferred to people permanently, right? Which I can't say is a bad thing, but because people abuse that power, right? Like the whole idea that Bibles were written in Latin so that people couldn't read. You're like, yeah, what a dick move. I know my dad, like the reason why we were so religious because when he was a kid, you couldn't get a Bible. You'd have to carry it in a paper bag and hope nobody stopped you, like as if it was pornography, because otherwise, yeah, you would get in trouble. Like people would be like, "What are you trying?" Like they would accuse you of all sorts of things, right?
That's pretty nuts. I didn't know that.
Well, and that's why, like I feel like every generation always looks towards, that forbidden knowledge, right?
Oh yeah,
and of course, that forbidden knowledge now is. I have no idea because there is way too much out there, but yeah, right.
There's like I found out there's something called like sludge content, or it's got something with the word sludge in it, where you have literally like 6 videos going on at the same time, and then
mass consumption of content.
or just so like you never quite get a focus on anything. I think that just kind of happens with whatever the newest generation is. They will take the formats that they have available to them and play with them, and then all the old people go, "Ah, what the fuck,"
For sure.
Yeah,
Well,
television, fuck,
TikTok, Reels,
Yeah.
stories, all those kind of
Yeah.
things. Super brutal, right? Excuse me.
I'm
Hey, listen,
sorry. Some of those are just so well timed. Yeah.
it's God's blessing on me. Thanks, bro.
Yeah.
It's but like it's the whole that's the weird part is that everyone, like, there's a difference between progress versus change for the sake of change, right? And I feel
Mhm.
like some of this stuff is change for the sake of change, right? And
Yeah.
also there's forced efficiency when no efficiency was needed, right?
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing.
I think that'll happen with like the stuff that sticks around. It's kind of like with new music. Like all the good music that sticks around is the
Yeah.
the progress, and then all the shitty music that faded into the background. It was change for the sake of change. So,
Yeah. Well, so, and how much, and let me ask you this, Atlas, because this is a fair point, because being from different generations, I'm sure we're going to have a different perspective on this, was that at this point in time, I feel like there's such a mass amount of content being produced, and also still such a severe amount of gatekeeping. If it's not the worst it's ever been, like, do you think that we're missing some stuff? Like right now, there's a lot of new music that is old music with new lyrics done by somebody else, and you're like, that's not you're not creative. You didn't do anything, right? That's my perspective. And for the record, it's also Prince, the artist, his perspective. He's like, yeah, I don't use samples. I'm a musician. I'm an artist, right? Suck it. But like, so it's like, how do you think that that's going to be an issue going forward? Like, because realistically, there are people who abhor change and progress, and it's the same people who gatekeep the idea of having a monopoly over certain industries, and go, oh, no, there's no way. And you're like, as soon as that monopoly is taken apart, suddenly, like, the idea of how many people have gotten YouTube. Oh, Justin Bieber got famous because of YouTube, because of what he was doing on there, right?
Yeah.
How do you, like, is that still possible?
We're like so many
As an artist, right?
To
like writing a
story,
story, same thing. You can publish your own book and put it out there, but nobody's going to sell it. Why? Because nobody knows if it's any good.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not a popular writer. You're not, right?
I think you'll, no matter what, you'll find your audience. Like I know for example, history YouTubers, they're not necessarily gonna be super famous or anything, but they have the people who are interested in that sort of topic. And then it all comes down to the algorithm. And I know we're like miles away from books at this point, but
it's still media. It still counts. Yeah. Because, like, honestly, I have dabbled in writing quite a bit, and I'm looking to get back to it now, just as part of my schedule, where it's like an hour a day. I'm going to try and write, but
yeah,
it's one of those things where I'm like, I have a very creative spirit, but as you can tell, I'm weak and squishy on the outside. So it's sometimes it just becomes too much, right?
Yeah, I guess
weird
so.
Things. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
There's one thing that, so when you were a kid, it's all fiction, right?
Yes.
All you care about is like, cool. You go from like green eggs and ham to Goosebumps to whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
As you get older, and then like,
I loved Goosebumps and R.L. Stein. So good.
Yeah. As an adult, I have been really into nonfiction.
Yeah.
I think because a like getting into history, so like by definition, history is nonfiction.
Yes.
Until you do historical fiction. But I haven't really gotten into that much. But like there's that, and then like reading sociological stuff, like Bullshit Jobs, which was which I think we brought it up during our work episode. Where it's just books that help you understand the world around you and the people around you.
Yes.
More directly than you would necessarily with fiction. Like,
Yeah, I feel
like
like
The
you could
Great
get this.
Gatsby can help you understand the early 20th century mind, but it still is fiction.
Yes.
Versus
Well,
if you wrote or if you read a book in particular about prohibition, you know.
see, so I had this experience. I have, it's an author, E.B. Webb the third, maybe something like that. And Webb has like way too many B's, but he wrote a bunch of books that were based on World War II, Cold War type shit.
Okay.
And every theater that he discussed, he also kind of explained like the actual history, and then he took his story and kind of implanted it to explain certain things that we just don't know how it worked out,
Mm.
but we know how it affected the entire thing, right? So there was the explanation of what happened in the Philippines and stuff like that, and also like in South America and Argentina, like all these places where you're like they were huge components to how history played out. And like one of the big things was I remember the first time I ever went to China, which was like 2006 maybe.
So this is before the Beijing Olympics,
Before the
right?
Beijing Olympics,
Okay.
before I even met Victoria. Okay.
Okay.
I went, and one of the guys, I was like, they were talking about a soccer game or something, and I was like, "Oh, do you guys ever go to Japan for that?" And he was like, he kind of was like, "No." I'm like, "But you guys are so close." He's like, "We don't like the Japanese." I was like, well, "Why not?" He goes, "What do you know about World War II?" And I'm like, Mostly European history, and like you guys had a lot of stuff going." And then he started telling me, and I was like, "Oh Jesus!" I'm like, "Oh, this is much worse." And then you realize you're like, "Yeah, there's a lot more history that we're not really not exposed to, but I think we're you only learn if you start if you want to, right?" So me being Greek, I learned about what happened in Europe, and also living in Canada, I learned what happened in because of Canada's involvement. But it wasn't until I started reading that you're going, "Oh, it was a world war because everyone got fucked." Interesting. Good to know. That's beneficial knowledge. So you kind of realize you're like, it's history is seldom number one, very in depth. So it's like I don't know. I think that would be like historical fiction would be where that would qualify, right?
Yeah.
Where it's, but I'm like, I really appreciate that because then it's like, hey, this is what fucking shit happened, and we're gonna implant these characters to kind of make it all make sense because it's a good story, and you're like, that's
Yeah.
fine. But like when you have some real history, like it's a lot easier to consume
Mhm.
as somebody who consumes a ridiculous amount of content.
There's
You
like
know,
that, or the you can do alternate history historical fiction. That's really fun. Like,
I
there's a
wrote.
guy named Harry Turtledove who's like the Stephen King of historical fiction, where he's like pumping out books.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's on cocaine for a name like that. But
Hey, that's
um,
fair. It might
he's
be
got
Stephen King, who's like, this is
yeah,
my alter ego. It only comes
yeah.
at night.
He's got an interesting series about like the South winning the Civil War, and then what happens after that. In the Because it's not just immediately after, like what happens to the slaves and stuff. It's going into World War I and World War II, and how
Huge.
the North and South take different different sides in like the First World War, where you have the U.S. joining the Central Powers and the South joining the
God.
Allies and stuff. It gets real crazy. Um,
Yeah, that would be an interesting read just to see how they would play through the emotions, right?
mhm.
Because that's the like I've always found that the best books expose a perspective and the thought process, like the steps that are taken to get to that point. Because if you know the steps that have been used to get to a point and you like it makes sense, then in turn your response can always be like, okay, that equips me to understand that how that series of events may work out, right? Because like, well, have you seen what is it, The Man in the High Castle?
Yeah, yeah.
Like we got quite a ways through it, and at the end I'm like, it's just too much Nazi. I've had my fill of Nazi, which
Yeah, that's why I like World War I, because you get Germany without the Nazi stuff. Yes.
Yeah, well, and every time, like, this is one of the things where I really get angry about is that my parents were so um, focused on the ability to critically think in situations, and like I got my butt whipped so many times because I'm an idiot. Still an idiot, of course, but like you're like they really were like, no, just stop and take a second, stupid. Like, just stop for a second, take your time and think. You're capable of thinking through this process, right? And that was really, it helped because then you start to understand how things work, right? And it's like, even now, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've learned where it's like, oh, a perfectly complete response is no, thank you. That's a completely decent and full response and requires no more explanation, no more, oh, but I do. No, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It even drove me crazy dealing with people being on the other side, right? Where you ask them something and they go, no thanks. I'm like, okay. And then they go, it's just that. I'm like, don't need to. You're
No,
good. I
not
don't.
interested.
Yeah.
Well, and like, it's that.
I think that's part of growing up, right? Where they,
Mhm.
you go like, I can't do it. Why?
Yeah, well, the audacity of people asking why, you're like, who do you think you are that you have any sort of claim to my, like, I called out a couple of people for that. They're like, oh man, how come you're being like that? Excuse me? Being like what? And they're like, well, you know what I mean? No, I don't. Please. It's the same thing like when people are racist or uh, obnoxiously sexist, like entertaining sexist, I'm fine with. But obnoxiously sexist, you're like, hey,
Yeah.
not appropriate, But then you're just like, yeah, what do you mean by that? And they're like, oh, you're like, yeah, see, you're an idiot. That's why. Ta-da. That's why, like, that's the one thing actually I will say that I did have a problem with the Hobbit. Like, I got 3 pages in and I'm like, this isn't in English. And they're like, oh, well, he made his own language. I'm like, well, he can fuck off. Okay, how about that? And then I watch the movies and I'm like, it's so great of a story. And then you're like, oh, the Hobbit's 3 movies too. And I'm like, okay, get fucked. Okay, what are you guys doing now? This is too much. It's ridiculous, right? And then
Well,
you
it's
see
the
a dragon and
desolation.
you're like, well,
It's the desolation of Smaug, though. No, like,
oh, and then it's Smaug, and you're like, number one, that you may have a seizure. I don't know what's going on. Please don't do that. It's there's a certain, okay. Side note: have you noticed that people are continuously pronouncing things oddly? Is this just me, or
what do you mean?
you do it too? There's a word you use, biopic. No, absolutely not. It's biopic. It's not biopic. Biopic is not a word. It's a period. The first time you said it,
yeah.
myopic is a word.
Yeah.
Biopic, no, false.
I think that, well, because words change or whatever.
No.
Okay.
No. I am the Greek, and the Greek knows the words from the beginning, sir. That's one thing. Like, I feel like because a lot of people use AI to read out stuff because it's simple, right? And then you're like, half the shit is mispronounced, and you're just like, because it'll be like $40, and you're like, that's not just $40, man. It's $40. Just type out $40. You're fine. It's $40. It's fine.
Well, language evolves, and even if it was wrong, it's still gonna, become like dough, from The Simpsons. That's in the dictionary
now.
So
when they started, have you heard the story about when it started? They're like, he just expresses himself in frustration. Like, and it was like, expresses himself in frustration in brackets and move on. And they're like, how? They're like, so it was like,
for closed caption.
Well, that originally when they wrote the script, like, that's what it was. And you're like, wow, what am I supposed to say? Like, express yourself in frustration. I don't know, which is, realistically absolutely hilarious, but also ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's like a big part of books where like either they invent words or their own language. If you're J.R.R. Tolkien, because of course you are, you do, and and they just like have the power to change. Like, okay, remember the posters in the fucking school library where they're where they're like books open possibilities or like
Yeah.
shit like
And you're
that.
like, Shakespeare just made up his own words. You're like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair. You're like, that's not.
Yeah. Or it wasn't that. I don't even know what those posters were trying to accomplish. You know?
Well, like realistically, I think we're coming to the end of a world that books changed life, right? They really did change how life ran, right? Like that we went. I feel like it's the same idea behind transportation, right? We went from boats, horses, cars, then planes, and rocket fuel and
Forgot
jets.
trains in there, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that's the whole idea, right? Like transportation has progressed. Like I met somebody who was alive before automobiles were used.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is that? And she was like, it was a lot. It was a lot to accept. You don't really it's hard to describe how big of a transition it was. And then like for myself, I lived pre-internet and then post-internet. And that's a weird environment. It's a weird experience. But then that's the thing is like within all of that, there's always been literature, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that like literature throughout history has changed people's lives, right? So there's no way to expect that you won't be altered by literature. Right. And schools capitalize on that. But then you're like the library, which is one of the best resources in mankind, ends up being a haven for perverts and fucking weirdos, which you're like, that's ridiculous.
Well,
right?
it's also a haven for maybe people who are job hunting and that don't want to sit in their apartment all day and want to like be able to go somewhere.
Okay, I did not mean to attack you. I'm sorry. That's how it's not. But no. But like realistically, having a computer for public resource, you're like that's a great service to a community. And then you're like, oh, there are weirdos who look up porn, and then you're like,
yeah.
Well,
what are you gonna do? I mean, like,
yeah. But that's the thing is going to the library to as a way of getting out of the house to say, hey, I'm doing XYZ things and stuff. You're like, that's a fantastic benefit to modern civilization, right? And that's why you're going. We've lost that. I guess the value of it in
the
a day
appreciation of it.
Both, right?
Okay,
like people don't see the value; they don't attach value to it because you're like, well, you just Google it, and you're like, that's not a solution.
I think I get to see a lot of people go in and out of the library. A big part of the population of libraries are people with little kids.
Fair.
There's a lot of early childhood education that goes on.
Great.
In libraries, which sucks when you're trying to take a practice CBEST test, but but
it'll only make you stronger.
Yeah, but it's still like great to be able to have this resource like parks. It's basically like the education park, where
park
like
of the imagination.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. Where you're having these kids read to, they're exploring, they're learning like math and science and stuff. Also, you can do so much stuff at the library. It's not just room full of books and that's it. It's you can take out DVDs from the library now. And Blu-rays, which is pretty dope.
Yep.
So
CDs, you can actually rent audiobooks too, and they'll email to you. And
audiobooks. You can print stuff. You can make copies. It's all okay. You know how all the thing like millennials never own a printer.
Yeah.
Go to the library if you need to print something instead of like going to a print shop or to a Staples or something. It's way cheaper.
That's the funny part is that a library is number one, definitely a resource that's under attack. That's which is that is definitely a crime against humanity because like as a young person, I feel like I know myself did not appreciate books
Nope, me neither.
in the capacity that I could have or should have. So like because I had to fucking read the Bible, which I'm like, God damn it, that's a tough read. But do it or you get the whooping. So, but it's there's something to be said about exposing that part of your imagination and creativity that only reading does, because we're like, especially having a broad vocabulary, it only gets bigger with the usage of books. But then who was it, the guy, maybe it was Hemingway, where he's like funny that he thinks that it was criticism of another writer, and he was like funny that he thinks that big words create big emotions, and you're like, because they don't, right? So it's like, yes, there are a lot of very large, complex words that describe situations that you can use more words for. That doesn't make you dumb. It doesn't make you anything. It's just the fact that you can still communicate, and knowing how to do that, whether it's simple or complex, is a huge benefit and is something that books will give you. Whereas watching a video, you just go, huh, and that's it. Which you're like, that's not the same amount of transfer of knowledge that you receive, right? It's a tough one.
I think also with videos, it's harder to like go into more detail than you can with words on a page.
Well, the Goblet of Fire. God, the book was so much better. Which I didn't finish it, but like I read the first like 100 pages, and I'm like, this is like the first 2 minutes of the movie, and it took 100 pages. You fucking crazy? Like that's so much more detail.
The book is so much better, which is weird because Order of the Phoenix, the book after it for Harry Potter, is the shortest movie but the longest book. And
that doesn't make any sense.
And like on paper, that sounds pretty bad, but like it's the most well put together of the movies.
Is it really?
Yeah, okay. They did shave off a lot of stuff, and that sucks. But like, it was well done, and they also had a couple of like actor add-ons and like
sure
improvisations and stuff that worked out very well for it. So
yeah,
I'm not going to say the movie version is always the worst version, but it is the lesser where you get less.
Well, you don't have to describe the visual environment, right? So that in and of itself is a huge chunk removed.
You don't have to say like, okay, on the downside, you can't explain detail about the characters. You have to physically show it too.
True. And also you can't frame a person's perspective of the environment. You just show the environment and hope that they gain the perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing that led to Easter eggs and saying, "Oh, did you notice?" You're like, I didn't, because I didn't care. It's but it's an important part. So I don't know, man. I think that's something that definitely is something of value that we need to get back to, because soon we're gonna go back to stone and chisel, right? So and scrolls, just big scrolls.
We've been saying that since like what, the 60s, where they're like, nuclear Armageddon, going back to the stone. It's all the same. Well, I think we'll be okay in the end. But
I think it's what Einstein said, right? I don't know what weapons are going to be used in the Third World War, but the fourth will definitely be sticks and stones. So, and I think it'd be more entertaining. Maybe we'll write a book about it.
Maybe we'll have Martin Luther with the fucking... Martin Luther is like a weird recurring character on this show.
Maybe next time we should talk about him.
Yeah. So I guess for call to action, comments section, what book or book series really spoke to you as a kid or as a teenager? Put it in the comments below, or if you're listening to this, I think there's a Spotify question you can answer, or just go to at Generation Dan on Twitter and talk to us.
We welcome any interaction. Thank you so much. And
then,
in the meantime, Atlas, where can they find you?
You can find me at Atlas Novak, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or follow my other podcast at Nexus at Night. That's about this trading card game, Vanguard. And then how about you, Dino?
I'm at Dino the Genetic Marvel. I'm currently doing a daily. Okay, it started on Friday. It was supposed to be daily. Yesterday I had a thing, so it didn't. I did one this morning, and I'm going to do one at night. But essentially, it's 30-day countdown to vacation, where I'm trying to get much smaller so I can enjoy that vacation. We're going to the UK, and I want to eat pastries. Okay, Atlas. That's basically what I want to eat. Pies and deliciousness.
So you're trying to like overdo the losing weight so you can like get back up to
Well, it's twofold. The idea is that I'm number one trying to tell my story of how I did everything, because everyone who sees me is like, "Oh my god!" And I'm like, "I'm still fat, but thanks." So it's that side of it, but also just to go through the experience, because a lot of people are in the same boat, right? A lot of people are like, it's hard to keep going. And I'm like, listen, I'm still worried that I'm going to walk by a buffet and just back to 500 pounds. So I'm doing a 30-day thing. So you can follow that on my YouTube channel at Dino the Genetic Marvel. Also, I'm doing little videos of workouts that I do at home. Some of them I just do in bed, which I'm like, seems oddly OnlyFans-ish, but it's not. It's for free because I love you.
Honestly, that's probably how I would do most exercise, to be honest. If I could just do it and then immediately fall asleep.
Well, that's the funny thing is that I literally told the therapist that I'm like, I need something, because the biggest area because like my knees are shot, I'm old and crickety, and I make sounds every time I move. So I was like, something that I can start doing just in bed. I don't have to actually get up. I can just start doing. They're like, yep, we can work with that. And I'm like, perfect, because you know how lazy I am. 5 out of 5 stars. My laziness is 5 out of 5 stars. That's, I will find the easiest way to do something because.
Well, no, it's 1 out of 5 stars because putting 4 more stars would require more effort. So.
No, but pressing the 5 button twice is less effort.
Oh, okay. Good point. Good point. Right.
So follow me at Dino the Genetic Marvel, guys, and you can hear my story of how I'm trying to retire my life as a fatso. It's very exciting.
So, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.